This is my comparative assignment for sci-fi English. I was tasked with comparing the book that we read as a class, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, to any literature of my choice, and you can probably see it beside me, and what I decided to compare it to, after much debate and making life so much harder for myself when a much easier solution was in my hands, was 1984 by George Orwell. I really there's so many options. I hate when there's a lot of options, because I try to pick the most complicated one, and then I tire myself out, and then I realize this was the answer. And by saying that, I mean that these books are the same. They are the same. Notice the same color code too. Isn't that weird? It's actually ironic. This book is the male POV of a man living in a tyranny society with a corrupt government. This is the woman's POV in the exact same scenario. Now, because they're so comparable, I have to be really quick with this because I've done this 400 times already and the videos have been longer than 20 minutes. And I'm sure you don't want to sit through that. So let's summarize. The main point I want to talk about first is plot. And by plot, I mean the government in and of themselves. To start with Atwood's book, Offred, our protagonist, doesn't necessarily fear the government. Well, she fears the entity of the government. So Gilead is someone who pushes these gender roles on women where they're reduced simply down to their ability to produce children. And if they are not able to produce children, they die. Black and white. Her society is called Gilead, Gilead being the pusher of these views, and the upholders, like the police, are called the Eyes. Now, the Eyes are so evident that she fears them constantly. She'll be with people who are in her exact same situation of being oppressed, and she will still not express her feelings or act like she used to be before Gilead corrupted the society. In the same way that, hello, Winston has to do the exact same thing. Winston is okay, we'll start with the bare bones. Winston's government is called Big Brother. Big Brother, in the sense, if you ever watched the TV show Big Brother, point on blank. That is literally what Big Brother is in this book. There's cameras, there's microphones everywhere. He is so scared of breaking the things that work for him that don't get him in trouble with the thought police that he will sneak out with a girl into the middle of nowhere to meet up with her so that there's no microphones on trees. Pretty horrifying. Anyway, his main fear and his constant paranoia, which even made my heart race a couple times late at night, is the thought police. The thought police, if you are believed or suspected to have been thinking, literally, or doing actions that slander Big Brother, the government, you will be kidnapped in the middle of the night, you'll be killed, anything that shows that you have previously existed is erased. You were never born. You were never human in the eyes of Big Brother. Now, Winston is constantly faced with these views. And he knows people who don't necessarily agree with them, but he never voices his opinion. He never does a separate way to go home unless he absolutely has to. Some cases when he buys Coral or goes and meets Julia. But other than that, he abides by it, even though he doesn't necessarily know that, the thought police are lurking around. Now, this is a real life idea. This is actually seen a lot today. If you've watched any documentary on how prisons are built, you'll be introduced to the term of the Hoffmore effect. The Hoffmore effect is essentially when people act differently when they think that they're being watched. It's actually the center of a lot of the things in our society. Exams, for instance. Where does a teacher stand in the exam? In the back to make sure that we're not teaching or they're walking around. In prisons, one of the most efficient prisons in keeping prisoners from escaping is one with a huge tower right in the middle of the area. And there's windows, so the prisoners think that they're constantly being watched. The irony of the situation is that there's one guard at the top, and you know what he does? He opens the cell gates every other hour and closes them and tells them to go back. It's more people on the floor, which is ironic because they have the lowest, violence rates in the prison because of this. People think they're watching, always, but they're not, which is ironic. And it's ironic in this sense too, because we don't know he thinks that the thought police are always watching him. She thinks that everyone is an eye and everyone is going to report to Gilead that she has these varying opinions and she's rebelling against their guide. But do we know it? No, we don't. The only instance that two instances when he actually gets caught is one, Julie in the beginning, when he assumes that she's a thought police because she keeps stalking him, but she's not. That is the only, then the second case is when he actually gets caught, which is towards the end of the book. Which again, that depicts something that we see today. It's a very real thought and idea. We just put a name on it. But that's irrelevant. That's just my first point. Now my second point is going to blur into a third because they really go hand in hand. And they both further the idea of once you're in a tyrant government, you can't escape. There is nothing that you can do to make a change. That is evident everywhere. In real life and in these both books, because they're both the same. And to start, let's go with 1984, because 1984, I argue, does it much better. 1984, Winston is a writer. And he talks about old speak and new speak. And it's constantly like an MLA format. You know how they constantly change over the years? They're constantly adding restrictions to the language that people can use. And the goal with that is that so that their people and their citizens can't say anything to slander Big Brother. Now, because of this, Winston is oppressed by his language. As a writer, he's restricted on what he can write. He can't say anything negative about Big Brother, or he's basically a reporter who writes in the newspaper, and he can't talk about what he actually feels or what he actually sees. So as a result, he buys a diary, which we see in the beginning of the book. And one of his first passages, which I'll read, is down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, and down with Big Brother. He follows that with, they'll shoot me, I don't care. They'll shoot me in the back of the neck, I don't care, down with Big Brother. They always shoot you in the back of the neck, I don't care, down with Big Brother. You get the gist. Now this is constantly repeated because this is the only form of rebellion that he can do. All that he can do is write in this little diary that he keeps tucked in his little desk to voice his actual opinions. Isn't that a real life idea that we see a lot? I would argue so. Now that same idea is also seen in The Handmaid's Tale. Offred is not supposed to know how to read or write. In one of the first instances we see, she's reading, she doesn't understand what it says, and the translation is like, don't let those bastards get to them. I love that quote. And essentially, she's not allowed to read, she's not allowed to write, but she plays Scrabble with the commander. This is her little rebellion, their little rebellion. And so she can spell words like zygote, or it's a form of rebelling for her. But in the end, for both of Offred and Winston, what does this achieve? Nothing. Literally nothing. Winston still writes the same articles praising Big Brother in his work life. And that diary is ultimately, it attributes to his death. It's not a main reason, but it definitely attributes to it. And for Offred, her little Scrabble game, got her in the back of a car that we could argue was the same fate that Winston received. Now, this idea of speech being oppressed is seen probably everywhere. Everywhere. South Korea, where we don't even hear anything about them because their tyrant of a government restricts it, or restricting forms of media. There's many times where TV shows are banned. This is mostly China, where one of the topics in the show is fighting against the government. The government is oppressive. They ban. That is restricting of language. That's restriction of media. You're not exposing people to everything. And during the beginnings of the Russian-Ukrainian war, how many posts and articles did we read that Putin had shut down all news sources out to the world? They were an isolated bubble. They were isolating them. They couldn't speak. I had an author who I used to read her comics all the time. She still hasn't actually posted now that I think about it. So I don't know much about the Russia, and I'm not really big on it. But it's definitely an idea we can see countless times over and over and over again. Or what's another instance in this book of useless rebellion that gets them absolutely nowhere? Another one I can think of, actually, just off the top of my head, is Julia. Julia and Nick. They were both the significant others of our protagonist. Well, significant others, it's a little broad. That was their forms of rebellion, right? Winston sleeps with this 28-year-old out in the woods because it's the only place that he's free of the corrupt government. And she ends up betraying him. But the whole reason that she was with him, well, one of the reasons that he was with her was to defile the government rule. Same in The Handmaid's Tale. Offred plays around with Nick because she wants to take something back in her life. How many quotes about reconstruction and taking back have we read where she's, from now on, I'm going to be selfish? It's constant. It's a constant reminder. And still, all these rebellions or all these acts of rebelling, and she reaches the same end. She and Winston both received the same bullet in the head. This isn't as clear, but my take on it, it's the same conclusion. Now to finish, why is comparing these two novels at all significant? What's the point of me doing this now 10-minute video about comparing two ideas which I would argue are probably inspired by each other, just by it's not normal to have that many comparatives. And she's actually commented on this book, so it wouldn't surprise me. Well, what is one of the key things that we find when we're looking for a book for a main idea? What is the key thing that we look for? We look for repetitive ideas. A repetitive idea in 1984 is doublespeak, which is basically bland hypocrisy. But it is constantly messaged, constantly mentioned, and we constantly see it. Doesn't it mean it's important? If I'm seeing this same idea of once we're in a totalitarianism government, that there is no way for you to get out of it, you see it over and over again, you don't think it's going to stick? That it's going to be a takeaway from reading these two books? Mind you, this is probably the first time I've ever come in contact with a story that ends without superheroes or the girl getting the guy at the end of the novel. Sarah J. Maas books are back there. And it's depressing. But it's a real life idea. It's comparing these two novels is a wake-up call. This is both Orwell's warning to society, and so is Atwood's book. Both of them were warnings towards the future. And they reveal a hidden truth. Atwood was smart. Atwood knew what was going on. As you have said in class multiple times, Atwood knew what Germany looked like during the Second World War, how people were oppressed. It's a constant idea. And she proves it with a character. Orwell proves it with a character. And the more we see it, the more real it becomes. The more you kind of place the connections into the real world. Like the Hoffmore effect. The Hoffmore effect, I saw in a Facebook video, and I was reminded of it when I was reading Orwell's book. Or the South Korea, how many things are banned around the world? We're banning talking about racism in the States, which is a topic you talk about a lot. Or restricting speech. We restrict speech everywhere. You see all these small ideas and you draw the connection. You go, holy cow, that is what will become if we don't start taking action now. Anyway, that is why I found it really necessary to compare books. Because when you're comparing two novels, you're going to start comparing it to the real world and go, oh, yeah, that's actually kind of right. Anyway, that's a wrap on my comparative, and just for argument's sake, I am going to say it just to piss you off. 1984 is my favorite out of the other one. Sorry. I love it. It's so much easier to read. Oh. Anyway, there's a meme for you I made myself.